Hey everyone, Tim Clapham here with the final class, week 10 of c4d215 for FX PhD, and this week we're going to wrap this project. We're going to mostly concentrate on building some shaders and using MoGraph to control those shaders. We're not going to really be creating very complicated materials here. It's more about how we can use the procedural nature of MoGraph to facilitate like the easy texturing of all these different elements and to control them with effectors and stuff like that. The first thing I'd really like to do is have a look at how we can take our objects and colour them as they pass through this part here. Now ideally this would have some kind of painting object like a spray can or something that's going to be colouring in our objects, but unfortunately due to the time constraints of the course I just haven't had time to add that part, so you can imagine it's there. But what we're going to do is we're going to have our objects come up here. They're all going to be plain, and as they pass through this area here, they're going to pause for a moment, and then they're going to colour in as if they were being painted, and then from there on they're going to be fully textured objects. Let's just have a quick look at the theory behind this. I'm going to create a new scene, and in here I'm going to add a cloner, and then let's just make a cube a child of this. Let's just make that cube a little bit smaller, and perhaps set this up as a grid array. Okay, so the cloner first of all has a transform tab, and here you can see we can set the color. So as we move this around, we can define the color of our clones. The other thing that we can do is we can use effectors. Let's just add in a plane effector. Okay, and under the parameter tab, switch off position, but let's enable color. If we switch that to on, you can see that with the effector at 100%, it makes all of our objects white. And if we take that down to 0, there isn't any actual effect there. The reason for that is because under the color parameter, we need to check this option to either use the alpha or to use the strength. So if we check this, and now if we adjust the strength, you can see that our clones go from pure white to grey. And you think, why don't they go to black? Well, the reason they don't go to black is because they're returning to the colour that the cloner has set them. If we set that to black, now they've gone black. This is having no effect. They're returning to their original colour that the cloner sets them. If we set this up to 100, they're going to go white. Now you can also use blending modes in here, so that you can stack these in a way and use it almost like to composite your colours on top as if you were using layers in Photoshop. On top of this, we can of course use fall off. So if we set this to be spherical fall off, you can see, if I just drag this out and move this around, you can see that as I move this effect around, the areas that are in the red part are receiving the 100% strength of the effector, and then we have this fall off where we get these greys and then they return to black. So it's fairly simple the way that it works. We can define a color with our cloner, and we can use effectors to kind of take that towards white or even towards color if we're using things like the shader effector with some shaders in there. And essentially all the cloner's doing, if we select this and make it editable and fold it down, you can see that on these cubes they've retained that color, and that's because under the basic tab we have this use color set to automatic. Now if I add a new cube, you can see that that's off, but what the cloner's actually doing is it's using that to change the color of our objects. It's just the display color. It's like the internal color of that cube. It's stored on that cube. So in other words, the cloner in combination with effectors is generally creating grayscale values from black to white. We can then take those black to white values, and using a colorizer we can map them across a gradient. That's exactly what we're going to do here. If we switch to the material manager, you can see that I've created a few materials already, and as you can probably remember from last week, I've already placed these onto the object and set up all the selection tags, etc. So all we need to do really is to worry about these materials and not how they're placed on the objects. And as these objects pass through, we should be able to change the color of them. Now the problem with using the cloner transform color in combination with effectors, as I just showed you, is that you just basically have a very standard default material. You don't really have any control over that. So although you can change the color, you could add the random effector which would add color in there. You don't really have much control over that material. So we have the MoGraph color shader, which allows us to take that control and drop it into any channel of any material that we want, and that's what we're going to do here. So first of all, I'm just going to select the blue, white and red materials and switch to the color channel, and in here I'm going to choose texture, MoGraph, and add in the MoGraph color shader. Next, what I'm going to do is add in a colorizer. Now a colorizer takes a grayscale or any image, it basically looks at the luminance or the input that we specify. If it's black, it picks color from one end of a gradient, and if it's white, it picks color from the other end, and any gray values in between, it will pick from the gradient in between each end. So if we select our blue object first of all, let's open up Colorizer. What's going to happen here, depending on the color that the cloner sets our object, if it sets it to be black, it's going to pick it from here, and if it sets it to white, it's going to pick it from here. What I'd like to do is start off with a white color, so let's select this first knot, make it white. Let's get rid of that middle knot and select the last knot, and this is the blue. So for my blue values, I'm going to use 74 for R, 91, and 171. Okay, so it's as simple as that. That's the only change I'm going to make. And what will happen is that as the effector controls the color that the cloner is making, our objects are going to start at this end and they're going to end at this end. So in other words, as they pass through this effector that we will place here, it's going to color them in. They're going to go from white to blue. We can actually just copy this and select the other two and paste it onto there. Just save us a couple of clicks. So on the white example, I'm going to call this yellow now, because I'm going to change it to yellow. Let's open this up, select this end knot, and for the yellow color I'm going to use 250, 198 and 53. So it's almost like a very warm cadmium yellow. Let's select the red one, and here we're going to select this end knot, and for my RGB I'm going to use 250, 57 and 69. Select both of the cloner objects in the Object Manager and then choose MoGraph Effector and add in a plane effector. Switch to the Parameter tab, let's uncheck Position and set Color Mode to be on. You can see immediately that these, let's just press play, you can see that these objects all take on the colors here. If we grab these two cloners and make them white, and let's grab them, make them black, it's not making any difference. Now the reason for that is because this plane effector color, the blending mode is set to default, but we could set this to add, we could set it to multiply. So that's one way that you can control the color. We're going to do it using fall off. Let's just select both of these and set that value to 50. Because we have this set to default, it doesn't really make any difference anyway. Let's call this toy color. Just put this into the same hierarchy. So switch to the fall off tab, enable fall off, and we're going to use box fall off. And you can see as soon as we do that, they're outside of that area. We can grab this, pull it down, and it colors them. Hopefully you can see that happening. So what we really want to do is to pull this up, something like so. And let's just make this 160 by 160 because we know that's 80 radius. Let's have a look, and now if we press play, as they pass through, the color disappears. This is because we have our fall off inside this area, but if we just invert that fall off, you can see we've now achieved that result. Really easy, nice and quick. Let's switch off the visibility. You can see now as the toys pass through this area, they get colored in. If we just stop here, I've used the same materials on the high-res objects, so we can switch the proxy over, and there you go, and you can see now that we have all of our toys in these three colors that I've picked, like so. Now the exception here is the beach ball, and this is an interesting case because it will just show you an alternative way of perhaps using our color shader. Okay, before we set up the beach ball, let's just select these, and what I want to do is just select this color, then you can drag it down and store it here. And now if you don't see this, you can actually choose quick storage from here, and if you want that to be in your color picker at all times, if you open up your preferences, switch to units, and here we have quick storage. It's a handy way to reuse colors throughout a project. So I'm just going to do that for all of these, just so that I have these colors handy. So if we come to the beach ball, first of all let's come back and just copy this colorizer, select the beach ball. Here we've got a layer shader. If we open that up, you can see that currently we've got this gradient as a layer mask, and then I've got just a simple color shader which just allows you to put color. So what we're going to do here is on this bottom color, let's just paste channel. So we paste in the colorizer that I had before. I'm going to open this up and I'm going to make this end here our yellow color. Leave the gradient as a layer mask. Let's paste onto this colorizer. The gradient which is creating the circle, I'm going to set that as a layer mask, and then I'm just going to paste in our colorizer once again. Let's open this one up, select the end knot, and make this our blue color. So now we get this funky beach ball. Now the difference here that you'll notice in the viewport, and this does depend on the graphics card that you're using, but generally I'm pretty sure if you use the layer shader, it doesn't show you the result of the MoGraph color shader when it's in a colorizer, because you'll notice where these are very simple and we just have our MoGraph color shader in a colorizer, we can see the result when we press play. But with the beach ball, because we're using a layer shader, we can't see the result here. If I just render this bottom part here though, you can see that that beach ball does in fact render white. And if we look at this one here, you can see it's just starting to color itself in. So it is actually working. So you shouldn't necessarily rely on what you see in the editor. It would be nice if the layer shader did work in the editor. In fact, it would be very nice. It would make things much easier. But unfortunately, due to some limitation where they've programmed this, it doesn't. But rest assured it's going to work when we render. Next, let's create a kind of glassy plastic tubing material. I'm just going to create a new material. Call this pipe, and let's switch to the basic tab, switch off the specular, let's enable transparency and reflection. I'm going to create a fairly simple material here. Let's set the refraction to be 1.5. I'm going to turn off total internal reflection and exit reflections. It will look a little bit cleaner and it will probably render a bit faster. And because the walls of this are so thin, calculating these internal reflections with all the rays bouncing around inside there is a little bit of a waste of render time. I don't think the render here will be too great, but it will probably look a bit cleaner when it renders anyway, because you won't get too much fussy detail in all of these areas where there are a lot of surfaces. The other thing I want to do in here is just add in a Fresnel shader. And let's open that up, right click and invert that, and just leave that at the default settings like so. Fold down the hierarchy for our pipework, and here we see the subdivision surfaces parent object. Let's just drag our pipe material onto there. Okay, so we can actually switch off the X-ray option on there now, because we're going to see the transparency in our viewport. In the material manager, let's take this pipe material and control drag to duplicate it, and let's call this pipe T. What we're going to do now is we're going to do a very similar setup to the setup that we have here. So we're just going to copy that colorizer from one of our previous materials, and let's switch to the color channel and paste that into here first of all. If we open that up, what I'd like to do is make it so that this T pipe up here is red and this one down here is blue. If we can keep that all in one material, then great, because if we need to make any changes to the material, we only make it in one place. So what I'm going to do here is, in this colorizer, set the interpolation to be none. Whoops. Okay, and let's select this first knot and make this our red color. Let's select this blue knot and just set the position of that to be 50. Come back up. Let's copy that. Switch to the reflection channel and let's paste it into there. This is the great thing about the MoGraph color shader. You can use it in any channel you want, and also want to use it in transparency. But the thing here is that we have this Fresnel shader, and I don't want to lose the effect that that's currently having. So what I'm going to do is you could use a layer shader here, but instead of that I'm actually going to use the fusion shader. So if we click here and choose effects, sorry, no, it's there, it's not in the effects, choose fusion. Now fusion is very similar to the layer shader, apart from it only allows you to really use 2 layers essentially, and you can have a mask in there as well. So I'm going to paste my colorizer into that top channel, and I'm going to set the blend mode up here to be multiply, and I'm just going to reduce that down a little bit to around 75. Now by using the fusion shader over the layer shader, we should see the result of our MoGraph color shader in the editor. That's the main reason I'm using it. You can do this perfectly well with the layer shader, but I just wanted to show you that with fusion it does actually show you the result in the viewport. So if you only need to use a couple of layers and a mask, then fusion is a good choice if you're working with the MoGraph color shader. As for the reflection channel, I think that the blue reflection is a bit too bright, so let's just bring that down, maybe set that to 75 as well. And let's increase the transparency by bringing some of this white in, and to do that we can just reduce the mix strength of our fusion shader, maybe to say 75 as well. So we're getting this kind of transparent blue. Next, in the object manager, let's open up our pipe across hierarchy, and there's our pipe T. So let's just grab this material and drop that onto there, and you can see that it's gone red, even though it looks blue here. And let's take the cloner Y, and we can grab this and drop that onto there too. Now I'm happy with this first pipe being red. Let's just render a little bit of it to make sure it's correct. There we go. This one I'd like to be the blue color. So what we need to do is select cloner pipe Y, choose MoGraph effector, add a plane effector. Let's call this plane pipe blue. Bring this down to the same hierarchy. I'm going to switch to the parameter tab and uncheck position. We don't want to be moving this pipe. All we want to do is to enable our color mode. And you can see that this has now gone blue, and if we render that part there, we should see our blue T-pipe. If we grab this effector, switch to the effector tab, we should be able to adjust the strength and see the result, and we're not seeing the results, so we just need to go back to the parameter tab, make sure that we have use alpha strength enabled, and there we go. As soon as we use alpha strength, now you can see that when we go past 50, or it's even 75, that's because the actual cloner is grey, not just to confuse us. Okay, so we have that set to 100 anyway. Because we only have two colours, we can use 0 and 100, and we know that we're even going to get red or blue, like so. Now, of course, this is a fairly simple setup, and in each of these cloners we only have one T pipe. But if we had, for instance, two of them in this object, then they would both be blue. If we wanted one to be red and one to be blue, we would either have to use something like a MoGraph selection, or we could use more than one effector with fall off and locate that in the position where the clone is. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to set up some stripes, and we're going to do that on our standard pipe object. Because we've already got the material on our T-pipes, we can essentially create a new material and place it on our parent object, and it will affect all of the standard or the straight pipe pieces, but it won't affect our T-pipes. In the material manager, let's double click to create a new material, and let's call this stripes. Select this material, let's switch to the basic tab, and I'm going to uncheck specular, enable alpha, and also enable reflection. Let's switch to the reflection and just add in a Fresnel shader. This is just so our stripes look a bit glossy, so I'm going to set the brightness to about somewhere around 15, between 15 and 20, and let's set the mix strength to be around 30. So we get this reflection happening. Under the color channel, we're going to paste in a colorizer. It should already be on your clipboard. If not, then just copy it from one of these other materials. And if we open that up, you can see at the moment we have our red and blue colors. Also want to have yellow. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to flip these for no apparent reason. Set this to 0. Set this one to be 33.3. Let's add in another one, make it our yellow color, and let's set this to be 66.66. So we now have our three colors. To create the stripes, we can do that in the alpha. So let's add into here a gradient shader. Let's open that up. Now I want to set this first knot to say 49 and this second knot to 51, just so we get a slight soft, between the two. If we could use interpolation none, but then you're going to get jaggies when you render. If we do it this way, it looks a tiny bit softer. Next, take this black knot, hold down Control, and let's just drag that across and set that at 1. Or you can just click and let's set that one at 99. Next thing I want to do is to right click on my gradient, just choose double knots. And let's do that twice. So we then get this nice pattern. So we can use these stripes, and you can see that it cuts out our yellow color channel. So we get some nice stripes, and we can place that onto our pipe. Now the thing is with the pipe though is that we've got walls on it, and this is where we should have thought about it in advance perhaps, but the trouble is things like this always happen in projects, and issues occur, and this is where maybe it would have been wiser to use instances as well. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to grab this stripes material, just drop that onto this pipe for now, and let's just copy that and create a new scene and paste that in. I don't really want the material on the inside and the outside. It's going to create this double layer. I don't know if you can just see that there, where you've got the two surfaces with the stripes on both. I just really want the stripes on the outside. So if we select this pipe and switch to polygon mode, now luckily we've still got our loop selections at the end, which is pretty handy. If you haven't, then just use UL and create these. And then what we can do is just press UF for a fill selection, and we hold down Shift and we can just fill that middle part. So now we've selected everything on that object except for the inside and the ends, which is perfect. Choose Select, Set Selection, and let's call this outer. Let's select our material here and selection outer, and we now have that just on the outside part of our object. Now obviously these stripes are looking pretty rubbish. What I'm going to do is select this tag and set the projection to be flat. Switch to the coordinates and let's set this to be, say, 150, and also let's set the bank to be 45, so we get these stripes like so. And that looks pretty good. Now because all our pipes are the same, we can actually just cut this from here, close this, come back to our scene and paste that pipe in. Let's delete this tag from there, and I'm going to just grab this selection and just drop that onto my pipe and then control drag that onto the others. So we've now, because they're all geometrically the same, that should work. If we then take this stripe material and drop it onto our parent object, you can see there the result that we have. Okay, so we have a couple of problems here. First of all of the pipes are stripy. You don't want all the pipes to be stripy, I just want to stripe some of them. Notice that this part here is yellow, whereas the rest of it's blue. And now this is to do with our plain pipe blue here, which is creating this T. But of course, if we apply this plane effector to this cloner, it's going to affect all of them. So now we've used the color shader on these elements. We're going to need to fix that. So what we really need to do is select this cloner object. Let's choose MoGraph selection. Let's just select that, and let's call this tag T pipe. Select our plain pipe blue, and let's call this plain pipe T blue. And we can drag this MoGraph selection into there. And now this effector is only affecting this single clone. Next thing we need to do is work out how we can get rid of the stripes on these pipes and have, for instance, I want this one red, I want this one yellow, I want this yellow, I want these blue, I want this one yellow over here. And we want to do it all in one material. That's the trick here, is that we're trying to keep it in one material so that when we change that material, it's nice and easy, and we can easily experiment with different pipes, different colors, without having to create loads of different pipes and loads of different materials. We can just do it with our one pipe and our one material and a combination of effectors. Now, because the color shader outputs grayscale values, we can use those values as a mask. In fact, we've already almost done that in our original materials where we use it to go from white to black. But what we could do is we could just use the grayscale values, and we could use those as a layer mask, for instance. We can then use to create transparency where we need it on the tubes without stripes, and we can control that color so that it is solid or white, to create the opaque stripes on the tubes that we want them to be on. So if we think about it, if we open up our stripes material, come to the color channel, and let's open that up, we've got 3 colors that we want to use, but we also need a 4th color because we need to split this into 4 sections so we can have no stripes, blue stripes, red stripes, yellow stripes. So it doesn't really matter what the first color is. Let's set our knots here. Instead of at 0, let's set that to 25. Let's set this one to 50. And let's set this to 75. And let's just add a different color at the beginning. Let's just make it white just for the sake of it. Although we should never ever see any white stripes, because this part should be essentially see-through. If we come back up, let's take this colorizer, copy it, go to our alpha channel. Here we've got a gradient. What I'm going to do again is add in a fusion shader. Let's open that up. In here we already have our gradient, and you know that where we have black we're not going to have anything visible, and where we have white it's going to be totally opaque. So if we made this all black, then you wouldn't see any stripes. So what we can do is paste in our colorizer, open this up, instead of all these colors, make this not black, Now if we come back up and we use screen and then invert that output, you can see that we don't have any stripes now. But we can control which part of this gradient is used, and this will correspond to our color channel, the same part of the gradient. So if we're using this section here where it's a white color, we aren't going to see any stripes. But if we use any of the next three sections, then we're going to see the colors. Okay, so let's see that in action. Well, you can see it in action already because of the color of all of our objects. Let's say we want to make this up here a red striped tube. So we select the cloner that it's attached to. Let's just deselect that MoGraph selection. And I'm just going to select that top. And let's call this yellow. Actually, red. I think I said red, didn't I? Not yellow. It doesn't matter anyway. But let's make that red. And it's good to use the same name, red, because if we use one effector and we have our selections on this cloner called red as well, or on this one called red, then we can only, we can essentially get away with using one effector for each color. So with that selected, MoGraph effector, plane effector, let's call this plane red stripe, red stripes. I'm going to just drop this onto the toys, pipework, sorry. And this. Okay, so at the moment this plain red stripes has got the position enabled. Let's disable that. Let's just pull this down, drop it in here. Enable color, and it's yellow. So all we need to do is adjust the strength, and of course that's not working because I haven't enabled use alpha strength. Now when we drag this, you can see that we get this change of color. So we can set that to be red. If we also want this one here to be red, we can use the same effector for that. So let's select this. Let's add in another selection. And this one was called red, so let's call this one red. And let's select this cloner, effectors, and drag the same effector in. And if you wanted to say, try any of them as red, you can simply just add or remove from that selection and it will work. So let's just do our pipe across. Let's select the first one. Okay, and let's call this yellow. I think I'd also like to add this one to the selection. Let's take this plain red stripes, dupe it, call it plain yellow stripes, and add this into the effectors list. Okay, so we need to just change the selection to yellow and then adjust the strength, and there we go. Okay, so I selected the wrong one there, but this just shows how flexible it is. We can just deselect that, add that one to the selection. In fact, we can just test any of these like so. We can see what it looks like on our different objects. It's that flexible. Nice, simple solution. Let's just select our pipe Y. Select this bottom one. Let's call this yellow. Select the cloner and just drag that effector into there. And we now have a yellow one there. And of course the same, if we want to make that one yellow, we can. I'm just going to dupe this and make a blue one. Plain blue stripes. Selection blue. Let's select our cloner pipe across. Drag this in. Okay, we don't have any MoGraph selection called blue at the moment, but I want to just colour these two. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There we go. Let's just call these blue. And there you go. And we just need to adjust the strength. So let's just pull that down. There. And there you go. So now we've basically set this up so with one stripe material we can choose whichever pipes we want to be stripy. We have these colours here that we've used on all our toys, which fade in. We've used the MoGraph colour shader in here. We've used it just as it is in a colorizer. We've used it as a mask. So hopefully that gives you an idea just how flexible that simple colour shader can be when combined with effectors. Now if you haven't already done so, it's a good idea to save your project, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to add in just some basic lighting and a background, just so that we can render some shots out so that you have a kind of finished project. I'm going to leave it up to you guys to set up your cameras and animate them. We just don't have time to do all that now, but before we do that, let's just select our scene null, hold down shift, let's add in a floor object and let's rotate that around 90 degrees. Come to our top view and let's just pull that back a little bit, just so it's behind everything. I'm going to create a new material, just call this background, BG. Let's add in a gradient here. Open this up, make this a circular gradient. In the middle here, let's select that nice yellow colour. And let's just make this slightly more orangey. Yeah, that's fine. Okay, select that. Let's switch off our spec. Let's drop this onto that floor object, put that on our scene layer. Now what I'm going to do is select this, and coordinates I'm going to set it to 1920 by 1080. And let's just render and have a look what this looks like. Okay, there we go. So there's something gone wrong. We can see our white stripes. Okay, so we need to fix that first of all. Never trust what you see in the editor, as I said before, and there I was thinking it was done. If you remember back to the beginning of the class where we started talking about colour in relation to how it works in MoGraph, remember that I showed you that the cloner itself generates an internal colour for all of those clones, and depending on which version of Cinema you're using depends on what that value is, but on more recent versions that value is 50% grey. So all of these pipes that we haven't affected with effectors are going to use this default value of 50%, and if we open up our stripes material, look at the alpha and look at the colorizer here, at 50% we're in the middle here, and we need it to be at this end. So what we need to do is we need to take the colour that's being generated by our cloner and we need to reduce that to black. If we render it right now, you can see that these pipes that haven't been affected are showing us our white stripes. If we take the transform tab on these cloners and we make that black, now if we render, you can see that these pipes are now transparent. But there is a side effect from that which you may notice, which is that these effectors are now producing the wrong colour. And this is because when I set that up, I had the cloner set at the wrong value. So what we need to do is we need to just select our red stripes, and we should be able to just drag through until we find red, yellow and blue. There we go. Now render, and that's the result that I was after. Now just for speed, I'm going to grab my blue material and drop this onto the concertina boxing object. And let's take the red material and drop that onto the sphere. Let's also drop this red material onto the loft concertina object, like so. Now let's add some lighting in here. Now first of all, I'm going to add in a sphere. and I'm going to set this to be icosahedron, and let's set the segments to be 12. Increase the radius to say 10,000, just so it's nice and huge. With that selected, hold down Shift and add in a cloner. Let's set that cloner to be object mode, and let's hold down Shift and add in a spotlight. Now I'm going to hide this sphere and make it so the clone is visible. Let's come to our top view. Let's just zoom right out so we can see what's going on, and you can see that all of the spotlights are pointing the wrong way. So under the transform tab, let's just set our pitch to be 180. So they're all pointing inwards now, and if we render this, it's going to be hugely overexposed. So what we want to do is take this light, let's reduce that down, let's set that to say 20. Now let's render. So we're basically just creating some really flat ambient lighting. Now you could create a gradient and put it on the sphere and use a shader effector to map that color onto the lights. The color that you use in the transform tab is actually transferred onto the light. So if we set that to white and render, everything's going to be even brighter than it was in the previous render. So let's set that down to 10. Okay, we'll put those onto our scene layer, just drop that into the scene hierarchy. Let's come up and add in a target light. Let's call this key. Select these two elements, drop them onto our scene layer, and instead of using a spot, I'm going to change that to be an area. Come to my top view, and let's just pull this back so we're kind of pointing straight at our pipework. Let's have a look from the side, and I'm going to put it down slightly as well. And the reason for that, even though it's very frontal lighting, if we render, is what I'd like to do is cast a shadow, so we get a shadow on that floor that's behind. But if we select something like an area shadow, because we've got that transparency, you can see it becomes pretty slow. And we don't even have best anti-aliasing on yet, so I'm actually going to use a soft shadow. Let's just have a look at that. You can see it renders much quicker. Switch to the shadow tab. Let's set the density to 50. Now I really want this to be quite accurate, so I'm going to set the shadow map to 1000, but this is going to make the shadow a bit too sharp. So what we can do is we can increase the sample radius, and let's set that up to something like 8. So then we get a nice soft shadow. The other thing I'd like to do is add in some reflection, so I'm just going to add in a sky, add a compositing tag, uncheck scene by camera, let's put that into the same hierarchy, and we need an HDR on there. So if I switch to my content browser, I've got a whole catalogue of them here. Let's just make them a bit smaller. Pick one from here. It doesn't really matter what I pick. Let's just try this one. Who knows what that will be like. This is going to just add some nice reflections onto our pipework. So just grab any HDR that you have in your collection. Be quite nice to see through these a little bit more. Let's just select this transparency and just reduce that down even more, so they're even more transparent. The other thing is, if we come to our toys, let's select these two tags, and we could choose to cache this. In fact, we can do it in our document settings, but before we do that, let's switch to our proxy. Press Command D, Dynamics, Cache, and then hit Bake. This is going to bake the dynamics, and if you're rendering over a network or anything like that, then it's essential that you really do this before you render. But I'm just doing it so that I can scrub to different points in the timeline and have a look at the result, so I can see it with presence in the tube here, etc., without having to press play every time, because we do have like 1000 frames. It doesn't take too long to calculate. If we were using the high-res objects, it would take probably twice as long. It depends on how high-res they really are. Mine aren't very high-res, but these proxies do speed things up considerably. So now we should be able to scrub through. There we go, and then let's switch that back to our high-res version. So for the key light, I'm going to set the colour to just be quite warm. In fact, let's pick that nice yellow that we already have, but just make it less saturated. Let's take this key and duplicate this and call this fill. On this fill, I'm going to switch the specular off. I'm going to make it blue and reduce it down to about 70. And let's just come here and pull this down to one side and just pull it down so that it's kind of shining up underneath. May even want to hold down control and just create another one over this side. You can see that I'm doing the lighting very quickly, and there's the result of that. So you can see that the rendering is a little bit slow. We don't even have best AA, so this is just to do with all the transparency, which is causing that problem. Of course, if this was a real-world project, we would have a much more defined script or storyboard. We would have gone through the animatic process, etc., before we got this far. But even with something like this, you could still jam out with a few different camera moves. I would render them as hardware previews with. You could even render all frames from various different camera points of view with some animated cameras. Then you could cut that together until you've got an interesting edit, and then come back and render it out. And I would recommend rendering probably with no anti-aliasing at a very small size, like 500 pixels. So your renders come out in seconds, a few seconds, 10-20 seconds a frame. I definitely wouldn't render all 1,000 frames from every camera point of view at that point. I'll be picking the frames that I'd cut it to, maybe with some handles. Then once you know that that's all okay, you can come back and commit yourself to your final render. But if you even just come in and just pick some interesting angles, you know, you could start here, for instance, come up here, these kind of things. Starting to look more interesting. So as an example, I actually set up a couple of cameras and rendered it out so we could have a look at the result that I got at the end. And I'll leave it to you guys if you want to carry on with this project or do your own thing with it, then by all means add in some cameras and render some stuff out. I'd love to see it if you do. But the result that I came up with, let's just have a quick look at that. And I just rendered this with geometry, anti-aliasing, and I just rendered it as standard def. Here we go. And you can see that I just created a few really simple camera moves. It's a very dodgy edit, very rushed, not a lot of thought gone into it, but it's interesting to see, you know, the different camera views and the result that we get. And there we go, and then we end up on the wide shot. So that brings us to the end of this class and the end of the term. Hope you enjoyed it. Be great for any feedback at all. And I hope to see you again on future terms here on FX PhD. Other than that, happy keyframing and good luck with your creative careers. All the very best. Thank you.